now to recognise that voices have been spoken on those lands for millennia. We acknowledge the deep connection of our traditional owners to country and their continual management of those lands through those millennia. I acknowledge the traditional owners around the country of Australia and any present here today in person or watching us online on the interwebs. My name is Sarah Bray. I'm the Senior Policy Manager at the Australian Forest Products Association. We're a non-government organisation representing industry in the full value chain of forestry in Australia. We represent the people who plant the forests, the people who care for the forests, the people who sustainably harvest the forests, those who haul the timber from the forest to our manufacturing mills, those who work in the manufacturing timber facilities, those who manufacture paper and cardboard and other bioproducts that we use in our everyday lives. We're so pleased to host today's discussion here in the Australian Pavilion, and I just want to thank all of the staff here at the Australian Pavilion for making this a success. I want to thank the Australian Government for facilitating today's important panel discussion. So what is our topic today? Sensitive afforestation, winning solutions for climate and communities. The World Bank predicts that by 2050 there will be a quadrupling of the amount of the demand of timber in the globe, and our supply for that timber product simply is not keeping pace to be able to provide this demand that we have by 2050. This week the Australian Government announced very excitingly, and AFPA was very excited to hear that the Australian Government has committed to increase the amount of timber in our built environment, recognising the storage capacity of our timber in the built environment. We grow the trees, cut down the trees, and that carbon that is stored in the tree is then stored in the built environment, and we plant the trees again. Unfortunately, and this will be a small part of that conversation, we're not hearing a lot of discussion globally about where do we plant more trees, how do we get more trees into the ground to be able to provide this increased fibre. We need timber for buildings, but we also need fibre, and timber will play a part of that in displacing plastics, making more bioplastics and other bioproducts. I want to thank the organisations represented here today: the Ministry of Forestry from Fiji, the Dja Dja Wurrung, the International Forestry Students Association, RECOFT, and the Australian Forest Products Association. I welcome you all here today in person and online for this exciting conversation. We're going to hear from each of our esteemed panellists for 5 minutes each, and then we're going to have a short conversation amongst ourselves before opening it up to the floor for questions. So have a think about your questions as we go through. So our first speaker is Tavita Bulai, and he's ably qualified to talk to us today. He's the Deputy Conservator of Forests and the Executive Director of Research and Development for the Ministry of Forestry from Fiji. Welcome, Tavita. Over to you, and this is the clicker. Oh, you don't need the clicker. Perfect.
Thank you, Sarah, for the welcome and also the introduction. I also thank the Australian Forest Products Association for the invitation to be part of this side event this morning. I believe we were given a question last night to respond to in regards to this side event, just to respond to the question that was given last night. Fiji, just a brief background of Fiji has a total land mass of 1.8 million hectares, about 61% of which, or around 1.1 million hectares, are covered by forests. Of these, 81.9% are taken up by natural forests, followed by pine and mahogany, our two major plantations, at 7.1% and 6.1% respectively. And then we have our mangrove, which is around 4.1% of the total area covered by forests. In Fiji, forests have been harvested and used as a springboard for economic development and have continued to make significant contributions to our economy in terms of foreign exchange earnings, industrial development, employment creation, rural infrastructure development. Our forestry contribution to national GDP is around an average of 1.5%, and more than 80% of our timber export earnings is generated from our two major plantation species, which is pine, Pinus caribea, and mahogany, Sweetenia macrophylla. Close to 90% of our total land in Fiji is traditionally owned by our indigenous communities, which are known as Itauke. Majority of our indigenous communities rely on forests for their livelihoods, and the harvest of their forests have benefited them through the payment of royalties, premiums, and goodwill. While developments are necessary in responding to our people's needs and aspirations, effective planning and implementation are vital to maintain the proper balancing of economic, social, and environmental considerations to ensure objectivity in making decisions relating to type, size, and location of these development projects. There's also the need to put in place adequate measures to ensure that any forest harvesting is within the forest sustainable cut level and in full compliance with our Fiji Forest Harvesting Code of Practice, which specifies the diameter limits for different species and other environmental requirements. In addition to the Fiji Forest Harvesting Code of Practice, we also have a code of practice in wood processing facilities to ensure that the wood resources of Fiji are processed to optimize economic and social benefits in an environmentally responsible manner, consistent with Fiji's commitment to sustainable forest management. All forest operations and wood processing operations in Fiji are licensed as stipulated under our existing Forest Act 1992, and field monitoring based on the two codes mentioned above are carried out on a quarterly basis. In 2019, Fiji launched its 30 million trees planted in 15 years initiative and is currently on its path to achieving its target. And in less than 5 years, we have crossed the halfway mark and covering a total area of around 17,000 hectares. Government also provides incentives for this planting and maintenance of this planting initiative. In addition, our ministry, the Ministry of Forestry in Fiji, is also implementing the emission reduction program. We have completed our RED Plus readiness phase, emission reduction program, which is important for small developing countries and economies like Fiji, which relies heavily on its natural resources. The emission reduction program is expected to bring about the changes in the adoption of more contemporary approaches and innovations, and more importantly, the change in human behavior towards the environment and the sustainable use of the forest and land resources. The Ministry of Forestry has been tirelessly advocating and working on promoting the sustainable forest management concept and has been continuously challenged by the increasing need for land for agriculture development, infrastructure, and settlement, which are the main drivers of deforestation. A key consideration to the adoption of sustainable forest management is the provision of an adequate income stream as alternative to natural resource extraction. The emission reduction program will now provide that alternative income stream through the monetizing of established carbon stocks as an incentive for landowners to adopt good land and forest husbandry practice. The ministry is also currently embarking on the review of the Forest Act 1992. In the 21st century, forestry's policy environment continues to change, coupled with new developments over the years, hence the need for the review of the Forest Act 1992 with a sharpened focus on sustainable forest management, increased and effective landowner participation, climate change, and globalization. Fiji is also undertaking a national forest inventory to update the status of Fiji's forests. This is important in improving our decision-making towards ensuring sustainable management of our forests. Fiji will continue to strengthen forestry capacity, its monitoring, its multidimensional forest assessment capabilities, and significantly improving the reporting to the Global Forest Resource Assessment reporting. We will continue to invest in our young to build the range of forestry-related human resources capacities, and we welcome and are very open to more partners in this area. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tavita. Our next speaker is participating. Oh, wait, hang on a minute. Just because we're running short on time, we'll skip that and we will, hang on a minute. Go to our next speaker, David Gantz, who's the Executive Director of RECOFT. Is very passionate about upskilling and delivering for communities. Thank you very much, David. Thank you very much, David.
Well, good morning. I realize I'm competing with the coffee stand behind us, but I will try to project as much as I can. My name is David Gans, as introduced. Thank you for the introduction. I run a regional organization called RECOF. Everyone always gets the acronym a bit wrong because there's a C at the end. It's the Regional Community Forestry Training Center, and its geographic coverage is actually Asia and the Pacific. We actually have physical offices in 7 countries, and I will be mostly talking about our work on the ground with afforestation and forest landscape restoration, in particular through community forestry, or in the case of Indonesia, social forestry, or in the case of Laos, village forestry. These are all participatory approaches to engage local people, including IPLCs in the event that countries recognize IPLCs. And it is ultimately about keeping forests as forests and maintaining a suite of ecosystem services from those forests. We take a landscape approach, and in addition to what RECOF does, we have a lot of state and non-state actors that we are collaborating with. So when you look at this diagram, the outer circle are all of the collaborators, or if you will, partners, and we are effectively trying to get to resiliency, communities that are resilient from shocks, both in terms of climate change, but also in terms of economic shocks, as well as their ability to reap benefits from the landscape, and for those benefits to be equitable. So I kind of view this a little bit like a xylophone. You have to have all the right pieces. If you have a xylophone without the pieces in place, you can make a mess in terms of not engaging with certain actors. So all the places of the xylophone have to be in place for the music to sound nice. At the bottom of this slide, you can see what RECOF actually does. So we do research, we do training, we do advocacy, or we do policy analysis and policy guidance, legal support, and so forth. These are the landscapes that we effectively work in, and in many cases, we've been in these landscapes for 2 to 3 decades. So this is also about building trust with local actors and making sure that those local actors are getting what they need from the landscape. We help them write management plans, and we help them get security in terms of land tenure certificates from the government. This is really, really important. If you're doing afforestation or reforestation programs, you need to basically have a long-term approach, and land tenure is fundamental to all of this. I'm going to go through some targets of where we are today and where we would like to be in 5 years' time. Oh, sorry. So we have community forestry in place in a lot of these 7 countries. Effectively, this has been a strong push of our organization in ASEAN, in Southeast Asia, but also in Nepal, one of our country programs. We'd like to scale up. We're being very, very conservative in terms of scaling up. So you can see here, we're only really adding about 70,000 hectares under community ownership. But in terms of community engagement, and I'm not sure why the slides don't look like this on my screen, but we'd like to engage 100,000 people in the next 4 or 5 years. Moving towards the restoration model, I want to just convey some opportunities and some risks. This is very important for us to get right. First, what are the opportunities? We need to make sure that there are economic incentives for forest restoration, for communities to benefit from these restoration programs, and we need the policies and legal infrastructure in place for good governance. We can't just put trees in the ground and walk away and assume that those trees will actually grow into a forest if we don't have good governance. Thirdly, we need some infrastructure. We need facilities. We need things like nurseries. We need road systems. We need the infrastructure to make sure that these forests are managed in perpetuity, not just one time, put trees in the ground and then walk away. That means we also need capacity. We need to build the capacity of local communities to basically run the nurseries, to do the restoration, to do the tree planting, and to obviously benefit from those forests in the long term. Part of that capacity building, I think, is also understanding what the environmental benefits are. Local people understand carbon already, but ultimately they need to be empowered to go through the FPIC process, the Free Prior Informed Consent process, so that they can be part of the climate action and climate solution. So those are the opportunities, but what are the risks? There are indeed a lot of risks. We can create more conflicts on the ground in terms of land use conflicts. We could be exacerbating human rights disputes. Obviously, in the case of land tenure, we know that land tenure and human rights are linked very closely together. We could get the distribution of benefits wrong. So the benefit sharing mechanism is extremely important. We need to make sure it's done in an equitable and transparent process. We need a grievance system to make sure that everyone is indeed benefiting from these programs. Last but not least, we need to make sure we're not displacing local people or taking away local livelihoods. That would definitely be a big risk. And then there's a lot of discussion now in terms of biodiversity. How do we increase biodiversity, make sure we're planting the right species, working with local communities to decide what they would like to plant, but also looking at some of the biodiversity contexts and ecosystem risks of planting perhaps the wrong species in the wrong place, or turning a savanna into a forest when it really should stay as a savanna. Last but not least, if we're going to be looking at the carbon markets and building that into these reforestation, afforestation programs, we need to be looking at integrity. The integrity of these markets is being questioned around the world. We need to make sure that communities are involved in a way that's really coherent for them on where the benefits will be. This was a paper that Rieckhoff released 5 years ago, and I still feel that some of the findings are relevant today. There's really a lack of data to help governments work with local communities and obviously the private sector on these forest landscape restoration programs. And we still have gaps in the capacity of local governments and government offices and rural communities to attract sustainable investments. A lot of people here are talking about climate finance. A lot of that climate finance is not getting to local communities. So we know this is a major gap. This was a gap 5 years ago when we ran this Forest Landscape Restoration Forum with ASEAN, and this gap still exists. So those are some concerns that I have, and obviously there are huge opportunities both in this region, but in the broader Asia-Pacific region as well. So I'm glad to see that Fiji is here and that the Pacific is well represented. I'm mostly here to talk about Southeast Asia and also Nepal and some of the lessons learned that we have from those country contexts. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David. And David's a complete legend because he's whilst he's kindly decided to, he's been able to join us today, he does have to run because he's got to go, and we know, as Natasha and I know, we had to run to get here today. There are large distances between the pavilions. So we'll let David go because we know that he has to go to his next event. But just thank you very much again, David, for that. And already from our presenters, there's some key themes coming through the presentations. When looking at reforestation, afforestation and forestry management, local people must be involved. Forestry looks very different in different countries and in different jurisdictions. And it's important to remember that it's not a one-size-fits-all across the globe in relation to forestry, and also that forests need to be managed into perpetuity. Our next speaker is actually attending online today via pre-recorded video, and I'll get back to that. We're very hopeful that they'll be able to attend in person next year, but this year they're attending via pre-recorded video. So this is Rodney Carter, and he is the Group CEO of the Dja Dja Wurrung, an Indigenous group in Australia.
Hello, I'm Rodney Carter, the Group CEO for the Dja Dja Wurrung. I'm speaking to you from Dja Dja Wurrung country, Jandak, which is in central Victoria, southeastern Australia. The First Peoples, the traditional owners of the land now known as Australia, have actively tended forests for many thousands of years. For Dja Dja Wurrung people, it is impossible to separate country or caring for country from our identity and cultural practice. Caring for country is the living essence that is shared between people and place. We have passed traditional knowledge down through generations to maintain our cultural identity. As a result, we, like other traditional owners around Australia, have an intimate understanding of forest environments and how they should be cared for. Over the last 200 years, waves of exploitation and Western land management practices have swept the nation, including mining, clear felling, land clearing and mismanagement. Meanwhile, Aboriginal people have been prevented from practicing our cultures and tending country in most parts of Australia. 200 years ago, Dja Dja Wurrung country was mostly covered in open woodlands. In the 1830s, colonisers came with their sheep and fences. 20 years later, central Victoria became one of the world's richest goldfields. My country was literally turned upside down in the frenzied search for gold. Forests were cut down. Once clear rivers were filled with sludge. Towns and cities were rapidly built. The legacy of that period continues to this day. The box ironbark forests here on Jandak do not occur anywhere else, but our forests are very different from what they were once. They are sick, now they are contending with the impacts of climate change as well. 10 years ago, JARA, our corporate entity, on behalf of Dja Dja Wurrung people, signed a recognition and settlement agreement with the state of Victoria, the first comprehensive agreement of its kind, which give Dja Dja Wurrung people the right to be included in the management of country. JARA is instilling Dja Dja Wurrung knowledge and cultural practices once again to nurture country through our forest gardening strategy, Gulp Gulp Dal Kunya, which means to care for, to heal many trees. Through the strategy, we're applying our traditional knowledge and practices in a contemporary way to restore wooded areas to health, structure and diversity they enjoyed prior to colonisation. The strategy empowers JARA and others to heal country. Healing country through cultural practice is also healing for Dja Dja Wurrung people. There are clear benefits not only to country and the health and well-being of Dja Dja Wurrung people, but also for the broader community. JARA has been advocating for resourcing to realise our vision outlined in the strategy. Without proper resourcing, we cannot work at the scale needed to heal country, particularly in the context of a changing climate. Through our recognition and settlement agreement, Dja Dja Wurrung people must be included in the management of natural resources. Through our own law, we are duty-bound to care for country as our ancestors did for millennia. Unfortunately, the regulatory framework around forest management in Australia continues to actively prevent us from leading work on country to heal and care for forests. This continues to exacerbate the dispossession of my people, the very people who have the knowledge and the tools to heal our damaged and sick forests. The rights, wisdom and vision of traditional owners must inform decisions about forest management. Dja Dja Wurrung people and other traditional owners must be supported to manage country using our holistic and culturally informed practices. Through Gulp Gulp Dalkunya, JARA is leading frontline efforts to reduce climate risks. These efforts will build resilience across local communities. They will help to mitigate catastrophic wildfires that further exacerbate global climate change. We are calling to reform of the statutory policy and regulatory environments that impact on how country is managed. We are calling for resourcing to be made available to enable us to work at the scale necessary to heal country. When JARA is able to lead through Gulp Gulp Dalkunya, together we can heal people, country and the climate. This will bring both local and global benefits for everyone.
I want to really thank the Dja Dja Wurrung for pulling that video together. Found it really insightful. And I guess, again, the further themes that are coming out through this discussion is that for us to achieve net zero, we need to do everything at once. We must listen to other voices. We must listen to Indigenous voices in Australia as to how to manage country. We also need to talk to our friends in other countries and learn from what they're doing in their countries and try and work out if there's things that we should be adopting here. We have to be pushing forward and trying to do everything at once to achieve this ambitious goal of net zero by 2050. And that's why COP is so important. It's a fantastic opportunity for us to meet and discuss and collaborate. Our next speaker is Cheng Ming Wei, and he's representing the youth in our panel. So Cheng Ming is the president of the International Forestry Students Association at the University of British Columbia. Thank you so much for joining us here today, and I'll hand the clicker over to you. Oh wait, you're not clicking either. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Chen Ming. Thanks for the introduction. The president of International Forestry Students Association in University of British Columbia. It is my great pleasure to be representing IFSA and young people to do a speech, The Seeds of Change, Empowering Youth Through Afforestation for a Sustainable Tomorrow. In today's world, young youth are a potent force for change, rich in energy and innovative ideas. Deforestation, driven by industrial agriculture and resource extraction, has ravaged our planet for centuries, impacting primary forests while the deforestation rate is decreasing. We still lose 10 million hectares annually. Afforestation, exemplified by initiatives like China and the Great Green Wall project, is a vital tool for livelihood improvement and combating desertification. Poverty and damage to the environment often happen together, affecting poor communities the most during climate change. Afforestation emerges as a pivotal tool in alleviating poverty, offering economic opportunities, and fortifying vulnerable communities. Involving youth in afforestation projects is transformative. Youth-led initiatives strategically focusing on economic valuable trees such as fruit-bearing or sustainable use timber trees not only generate income but also nurture entrepreneurship. These projects extend beyond tree planting, offering vocational training that equips young individuals with vital skills in forestry, management, agroforestry, and sustainable land use practice, ensuring a holistic approach to community resilience and prosperity. Afforestation plays a vital role in mitigating climate change by absorbing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and restoring ecological balance. Engaging youth in afforestation efforts empowers them to become climate change ambassadors with their communities. Young people can actively participate in reforestation campaigns, tree planting drives, and awareness programs to educate their peers and community members about the importance of trees in carbon sequestration and climate regulation. By involving the youth in monitoring the health and growth of planted trees, we promote long-term commitment and a sense of ownership. Addressing complex global challenges like climate change requires collective efforts from various stakeholders, including the governments, the NGOs, the business, and local communities. Youth engagement is essential forging these partnerships. By involving young people in afforestation projects and trees monitoring initiatives, we can promote multi-stakeholder collaborations. Youth-led organizations such as IFSA can collaborate with local authorized environmental agencies and community-based organizations to ensure the success and sustainability of afforestation efforts. Through these partnerships, youth can contribute their ideas, innovative solutions, and technical skills, making a sustainable impact on achieving sustainable forest management. Younger generation is the future. We have the creation, and we have the determination, and also we have the enthusiasm. Let's embrace the potential of youth-led afforestation as a catalyst for a greener and more sustainable future. Thank you.
Thank you, Qingming. And on that uplifting note, we have our final speaker for today, Natasha Sickman. Natasha is the acting CEO of the Australian Forest Products Association and also my boss. So a big clap, Natasha Sickman.
And I should say that Sarah is an amazing person who has pulled together today in an amazing way. So I think actually the round of applause needs to go to Sarah because of the work that she has done today. But from Australia's forest products point of view, I'm really, really pleased that we've been able to once again provide the space to have this really important conversation today. Since COP27, we have stayed engaged with our Pacific Island colleagues and also made new connections to broaden our discussion about sustainable forest management, particularly with regards to climate, First Nations and youth voices. As Sarah said, AFBA represents the entire supply chain associated with sustainable forestry and our renewable and sustainable products that we will need to grow at a greater rate as the world moves towards a low-carbon circular bioeconomy. Afforestation is a critical feature of sustainable forestry. The World Bank, as Sarah said, predicts that demand for timber will quadruple by 2050. We need to start thinking about where will those trees come from because, you know, as we think about 2050, it's not that far away, but for those of us who work with trees, it takes a long time to grow a tree. Depending on the type of species of tree, you could plant a tree today and it may not be ready for 30, 40, 50, or even 70 to 100 years' time. We need to have this holistic national planning to ensure that we've got that future supply. And that is a global effort that needs to be undertaken. Forestry policy feels like it should be easy, but as we've heard from our panellists today, there are many challenges. Central to these how decision makers actually engage with local communities who actually have deep connection to forests and, importantly, the management of these forests. Climate change is putting added pressure on nature and biodiversity. It is important that we value our natural capital in our ecosystems, but it's also important that we value our people capital, our financial capital, infrastructure capital, and our innovation capital. Ecosystems are complex, but when in harmony, they work very, very well. Together across the many voices and actors working towards achieving the goals of the Paris Agreement, we actually need to work towards achieving that harmony within this system, because we all have a role to play, but together I think we'll achieve a lot more, and that's where I'm going to leave it today. So we'll go to questions, but really, really thankful for our panellists today and for everyone in the audience and for everyone online to be engaging with us today. So thank you.
So now we're just going to have a little discussion with the panellists, and looking at the time, we'll see how we go for time, how many questions we can get through. Tavita, let's talk forestry. What do you think other countries can learn and should learn from Fiji's approach to forestry?
Yeah, I think this is a tough question for me. From Fiji's perspective, earlier this year during our Pacific Week of Agriculture, which was hosted in Fiji, we had a brief discussion within the South Pacific region on how we can assist each other. So one thing that came up from other Pacific Islands is to learn about our forest licensing and monitoring system that we have in place. To me, I believe that is something that I would like to share briefly this morning about our system that's in place. As I mentioned in my speech, that under the Forest Act, 1992, Fiji Forest Act, we license and monitor all harvesting operations and also our wood processing facility, which is our sawmilling and treatment plant operators. And also we monitor our kiln operators, kiln dryers. So for Fiji, all our harvesting operations they apply for harvesting license, and this go through a process from field verification right through to issuance of license. Normally it takes 1 week to 2 weeks to process a license because it goes manually. But in late 2019, we developed an online licensing system for harvesting, and this really improved the process of our licensing in terms of timely issuance of license. And to add on to that, it happened to be developed just before COVID came in, and it was a blessing in disguise for Fiji when the system was up and running just before COVID. And when COVID hit Fiji, due to the restriction in terms of travel, internal, and also the issue with the shipping, we were managed to continue with our processing online with this online system. So, and also to add on to that, just based on the video that we have just watched regarding the indigenous people, this system, our license system is also view the importance of engaging with our indigenous people. They own 90%, around 90% of Fiji's land. So it's customary ownership. So these are registered by individual clans under each different villages in Fiji. So consultation has to be done, and we have to get more than 60% consent from our landowners to be able to go through with the processing of our license. And as I mentioned, we also do strict monitoring of our harvesting and our sawmilling operations, which is done on a quarterly basis throughout the year. And I also wish to acknowledge the support of Forestry Australia and Australian Foresters Without Borders that assisted us in the development of the two codes that I've just mentioned, the harvesting codes and also the code of wood processing. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. And I think perhaps people who are new to forestry, who haven't worked in the forestry space before, would not appreciate how scientific and how regulated the sector is. As you're talking about the importance of having licensing, that helps with this proving sustainable forest management, proving tracing, so access to markets and those sorts of things. And it's also very encouraging to talk about because it's quite different to the Australian context of the high community ownership of forestry in Fiji. So it's very interesting. Thank you for your comments. Cheng Ming, what about the youth? What would you like the audience to take away today from this session in relation to what youth offer for our future in relation to forestry and climate change and the role that forestry might have in that, in achieving our goal as a globe? Thanks.
Thank you for the question. I think firstly, the youth people should join like an international organization such as IFSA. This fantastic group and community can make us to learn and study and communicate with each other. Because nowadays the forestry problems or climate change problems, not only in one specific area, but also in all over the world. It's over the boundaries of country, and it's even over the boundaries of the different policies. So we should work together, and we should study globally to contribute the youth power. And the second point I would like to say, youth means the next generation, and youth means the new idea. It provides the diversity idea in the group. So we need the youth voice. How do they think? That's the future direction, development direction. And the last point I would like to say, try to develop the youth people leadership. We can't only work to solve forestry climate change problem only one person. We need a group. We need other people together, and we need to collaborate, and we need to focus on our specific problems, issues. So if you can lead a group of students to work, to develop in the future, that would be the excellent way for the next generation in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And it's been such a joy for the Australian Forest Products Association to work with the International Forestry Students Association. We met in person for the first time, Natasha and I, with Augustin from the president at that time, last year at COP. And we were just overjoyed, overwhelmed by his incredible professionalism, his energy, as only youth can provide. And we've just been really inspired by it. And we've met the new delegation that's come along this time, and we've just had such a wonderful time meeting you all. So thank you very much. Natasha, I didn't give you this question beforehand, so just going to dump it on you. But what have you learnt from this session today that you think perhaps Australia or other countries could take away from the presentation in relation to the different forestry types?
Yeah, I think the biggest takeaway that I'm hearing from our conversations that we're having is that we actually have to allow space for these conversations to have, and in a genuine way, collaborate with those who are working within the forest. People who live and actually are connected to the land and the forest have
need to have a bigger say in government's policy making. And I think we've seen that with the Dja Dja Wurrung people when they were talking about some of the challenges that they're having in managing their own forest estate and what more can be done. So I think really I'm inspired that we as AFBA have provided this space, but I do think there is a change of mindset, particularly in the Australian government, around how critical forestry will be as we look to achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement. The other aspect I think which is really important is that land management and afforestation, and we're working with many partners at AFBA. Between the youth partners, our Indigenous friends, Pacific Island friends, Farming for the Future, looking at farm forestry, increasing those opportunities that forests actually and forest management brings, not just to what we would traditionally think as forest management in a sustainable way, but also for our farmers and landholders to understand that, you know, forestry can actually provide many multiple benefits to our society in addition to biodiversity, nature, habitat, and also that diverse income for landholders to actually have those beautiful products that we do want. I mean, I'm looking at the podium here and I think, you know, when we think about all the products that are in our everyday lives, we need to really start to be thinking about where are those products coming from and how much more of a role they'll need to play in our future goal to decarbonise our economies and to move towards that circular bioeconomy.
Thank you very much. We have time for one quick question from the audience. Does anyone have a question? Alistair? In a second.
So Natasha, you were speaking about you know, how you get more farmers involved in forestry activity, and I'm just wondering whether, and as you know, we're very interested in that as well. I'm just wondering whether you have some ideas as to what services need to be provided to farmers to do more of this. And I'm thinking of extension services and infrastructure and equipment and things like that, because this is a sort of alien concept for most farmers to put trees back on their land. So what are the kind of things that we need to be putting in place? And I'm sorry, this is a very Australian question. What are the things that need to be put in place to start rebuilding the idea of reforesting farming communities?
Thank you, Alistair. And I think it is all to do with, it is that education piece of farmers understanding, you know, what they can do with their trees on farm and the benefits to that. So the Australian government has put in some incentives to actually get trees on farm. There is a plantation grant to try, because it is, you know, there are a number of incentives to try and get more trees on farm. And we understand the challenges for many farmers when we say, when they're thinking about a future crop of trees, how long it takes to grow that tree. And then I think it is making sure that they are planting the right trees in the right place for the right purpose, really critical as well. So between the industry and the farming groups, I think there is a lot of work that can be done to build that understanding and those connections so that we do get those right trees, right place for the right purpose. And then it's also about understanding the diversity that they can come, or understanding the benefits that comes to their farm. So understanding it through that natural capital space, which I know we've talked about a lot, in the sense that actually increasing your natural capital on farm, increasing those trees on farm provides multiple benefits. So I think a lot of people sometimes are worried about the trees on farm, but there is actually a lot of research out there now that trees on farm actually help farmers in a productive sense in their traditional farming as well. So I think we're at the tip of the iceberg as far as that conversation goes. We haven't had enough of that conversation, and I think we just need to turbocharge it at present.
And I guess in the Australian context, you can see now in the media, the politicians are talking about it. There's a lot of discussion about imminent land use change, which could be a real threat or opportunity for the farming sector. The emergence of and the need to spread the amount of solar, the amount of wind, the amount of reforestation of biodiversity plantings, but also obviously yeah, and the carbon benefits, and also farm forestry is also another element. I think that's a part of a bigger conversation that we need to have as a country, and I think one of the lessons that we've learnt in forestry history is that farmers really need to be in the driver's seat as to what happens to their country. We need to make sure, as I think we've heard today, that local people have a say in what is happening around them. On that, Tavita, final question. Do you think there's some lessons for us to learn with such a contrast between land ownership of who owns the forests between Australia and Fiji, with such a high percentage of community ownership? Do you think that there's some lessons there for Australia in engaging with community in relation to forest management? And I didn't give him notice of this question either.
Yeah, as I mentioned that around 90% of our land is owned by indigenous people, and it's registered under different clans, under different villages. So now what the ministry is doing, the Ministry of Forestry, they are working very closely with landowners in terms of getting their consents for harvesting. That's not used to be before we don't do that, the ministry. We just leave it to the landowners and the company to consult, and then they come up with their own agreement, or buy and sell agreement, with the consent of the landowners to be 60% and more. That's what we normally check. We just check the consent, and it's stamped by the provincial office that confirms that these are the members of this clan, and they are registered, and it's stamped, and then it's good to go. But now over the years, we've seen that there's a lot of flaws and gaps in the agreements that needs to be addressed. The landowners or the indigenous people need to be educated in terms of forestry. Look at all the aspects of forestry. They need to be aware before making a decision. So now what the Ministry of Forestry in Fiji is doing is we are actually going out there to consult our indigenous people. Even if the agreement is already in place, we come in and we go through the agreements with them, make sure they understand the contents of this agreement before we witness the agreement. So the ministry is also in charge of witnessing these agreements before we take it from there for issuance of license. Yeah. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you for our question as well from the crowd. I just want to thank again our speakers, Tavita, Cheng Ming and Natasha Sickman. Thank you very much. Thank you so much for attending.